Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. In the past 15 or 16 years, I've been studying the behavior of dozens of thousands of people, of users from all over the world, mainly at Google, which I've spent my last 7 years there. 2 weeks ago, I left for WeWork. But today, what I want to do is talk about a very special thing that we did at Google, and I hope that maybe you can do it in your organizations. First, let me show my slides. First, I'd like you to take a moment, copy this link to your phone, and participate in this mock demo experiment. It's completely anonymous. Feel free to answer the one question that I have for you there. And we'll get back to these results later on this talk. I'm going to keep the link there for a few moments. So here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about uncovering user needs. I want to talk about DIN. DIN stands for Daily Information Needs, which is a study that we ran at Google Search. And we'll go to the demo later on. So let's start with the needs. Okay. So I want to tell you a little story. 2 years ago, I became very curious about something. So I interviewed 200 startup founders and enterprise product managers, and I asked them one question. My primary question to them was this: what questions have you asked yourself about your audience or potential audience? And I collected their answers to that question. I also asked them, how did you answer those questions? Very generally speaking, the findings were this: there's a strong need for them to get valid answers to those questions, but there's a weak, what I call, want. They don't want to get any answers other than the ones they're already getting on their own. Two findings that are really important here. They were asking themselves the right questions. Okay? Their answers to those questions were wrong. And I want to show you some of these questions. Before I show you, I want to tell you about something that I felt. I felt that it can't be right that they have such bad answers to those questions. So I interviewed 30 more VCs and asked them, how do you decide to invest? What questions do you ask about users, the audience of the company that you're considering an investment in? The results were even worse. That's why I'm not uncovering the names of these VCs. So I collected hundreds of questions, about 400 questions, and here are the top ones. So they're asking the right questions. Who are my customers? 97% of the people I interviewed asked themselves this question. A question that I think is probably the most critical one: is there a need in the market for the product? 95% of them asked themselves that question, and other questions. What I did is this: with the help of 50 of the 200 people that I interviewed, I asked them to organize the about 400 questions into logical groups. They came up with 8 groups, and I summarized each group into one question. And these are the questions. What you see here, I put those questions on this diagram of the stages of every typical product development process. First you strategize, then you execute, you build the thing, and then you assess what happens. So these are the best times to ask those questions. I decided to do more than that, and I wrote a book. Each chapter in the book is a question, and there are ways to answer, step-by-step guidance on how to answer that type of question. And it's coming up in a month, so I'm not selling you anything right now. 4 weeks ago, I'm talking about needs here. So the difference between needs and wants, what people need and what people say they need, what they want. So 4 weeks ago, I saw this tweet. And I'm showing this to you because a lot of great people, and I'm sure there are also great people here in this audience, a lot of great people with good intentions confuse needs and wants. So here's what Elon Musk asked on Twitter. You'll see in a moment that he picked the wrong date to ask that question. And he asks about what people need. The answers he is getting are about what people want. That was Back to the Future Day. So what happens here is this. He got some jokes back. Okay, let's ignore these. But he also got some things that might look interesting. If you were in his position, you might have acted on these. For example, sounds for when you tap on screen buttons would make the UI so much easier to use while driving. Make sense? Or alert me when speed cameras are on, and so on and so forth. But this is what people want, okay? It's not necessarily what they need. And his response was good feedback. We'll write up a list of software priorities in the coming weeks. Why our needs are so much more critical than wants. There's a very good explanation to that, and researchers know that for about 100 years now. Needs are coming from human behavior, not opinions, behavior, demonstrated behavior. Needs are coming from real life problems. They're very, very stable. Needs don't change much. Wants are fluid. What we want changes. Unfortunately, all of us are very unstable creatures. We change our opinions constantly, and we are not to be trusted with our opinions. We have no idea what's going to happen in the future, so we don't really know if what we say we want is something we really need. Quick reminder, if you haven't already, take a moment and answer the one question that I have for you that we'll use later in the demo. Let's talk about the Daily Information Needs study. So this is a study I'm proud to have started at Google about, I think, 5 years ago at Google Search. Again, stands for Daily Information Needs. What we did there is use a method called experience sampling. In an experience sampling, participants, the people who participate in that research activity, are interrupted several times a day to note their experience in real time. We ask participants to install a certain app on their phones, and we sent them notifications to answer the same question over and over again. And our question was, what did you want to know recently and why? So in the first round of this study, we had 100 participants. We asked them the question 8 times a day, and the study took 3 days. So 24 times they needed to answer the same question. We collected about 2,400 answers, and the next round, we did it with 1,000 people and collected 28,000 answers. And we also did that in many other countries worldwide, and we repeated that study every year. Just to give you an example of what we were looking for. So let's imagine that this is what people want to know, and in that is what people search on Google. We didn't ask them whether they search anything on Google. We just asked them what do they want to know. So for example, if you type this question into Google search today, you're not going to get a very good answer. Google has no idea what type of a writer you are. Google is very good with facts and with a lot of other things. For example, Google knows pretty well how tall is Barack Obama. So we were not interested in the Barack Obama height type of questions. We were interested in the what type of a writer am I. I'm not saying that Google is working on answering this type of question, but all of these questions that Google is not very good with are opportunity for us. This is why we ran this study. I think this is the last reminder. I want to show you what did we do with the results of this. So we took every answer, and this is a lot of work, but we did it as a team. We took every answer to that question, what did you want to know recently and why, and we classified it. We had multiple, I think about 4 dozen of different categories predefined that we changed them along the way, but we classified each answer to these categories. And then we created this chart, and that showed us what are the most popular categories. What are the things that people mostly want to know? How is this helpful? I'll give you one example, but there are multiple teams at Google that are feeding off the results of these studies. So for example, we looked at morning time. What do people want to know in the morning time? Can you think of 4 things? You wake up, what do you want to know? Weather, I think I heard all of them. Weather, news, what's on my calendar, and traffic. It seems pretty mundane, it seems almost predictable. And this is what led Google to develop Google Now. This is a relatively big example, but there are many, many smaller and similar examples to what Google did with these results of that study. Oops. Let's move on to the demo. So here's where it gets fun. Why am I not seeing this? Okay. So this is the file with all of your answers. Let's refresh it and see how many we got. Ooh, thank you. Perfect. All right. We got 184 answers. So I cheated a little bit, and I actually launched it yesterday and asked people on Twitter because I needed to know some examples. So I picked a few examples, and here's what I did with them. I also picked predefined categories. This is before I even looked at the data. So I assumed that frustrations with kids might come up from these topics or these sources, okay? And here is how I classify the data I collected from this study. So the first answer is this: wouldn't stop crying and whining for no apparent reason. So I would say it's crying or whining, and I think that's it. Their stubborn unwillingness to let me help them help themselves. So stubbornness, and I guess that's it, right? Next one. He wouldn't remain seated for the duration of the meal in a busy restaurant, and I had to give him my iPhone to stop him getting bored. Wouldn't remain, I would say it's food related, right? And maybe stubbornness. Lack of attention, I would say it's not listening. Not listening again. This is an example for what I call a bad answer. I mean, it's not very useful It's very informative, but it's not really answering the question. This is an example for a good response. It's very detailed, and I do understand what's going on. So this is how you classify. I should say that answers can fall under several categories. So what I'm going to do here is cheat again and pretend to be classifying all of it. And I want to show you what happens next when I use the data in a chart. So this is a chart I created on the fly, and this is really helpful in understanding what are the most popular frustrations with kids. This is helpful when you're feeding your team with information that can help them come up with ideas. We go back to the deck. All right. Final thoughts. A few things to take away. First, current behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Keep that in mind. If you ask people how they would behave, that's a very bad question to ask. Observe how they currently behave. Don't listen to users. Users have no, or people in general, have no idea what they're talking about when you ask them about the future. We're all like that, very bad at predicting the future. Instead, observe and track their behavior. When you do that, fall in love with problems rather than with solutions first. At least one person is applying that. Great. Falling in love with problems means that you ask yourself first, what is the problem I'm after? Why is this a problem? Who has this problem? What are the details of the problem? How are they solving the problem today? Don't do anything with a solution before you know all the answers to these questions. This type of study, experience sampling, can help you at least begin to understand the answers. And as I always encourage people, don't just believe what I'm saying. Try it for yourself. Please, it's so easy to do. It's not as easy as I did here because I cheated a little bit. But it's not a lot of work. You can do that, and you can get real answers to your question about what people need. Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes for questions.
The process of actually recruiting people to a panel, and how do you find those people? I mean, Google is, but if you're an independent
Google is not an example because Google is, what we had at Google is very fancy. I think there are multiple ways you can find people. One way that I recommend is go on social media. Don't tweet or put something on your Facebook wall. But look for the groups where you estimate that your audience lingers. Go to these groups, join the conversation there, learn about the group kind of mechanics, and then present a call to participate in your research. Some people will kick you out, but others will let you in. And you can also do that on pages. A lot of companies have pages, very popular pages, but they have no idea that they can block people from posting there. So post there. By the time they realize what's going on, you'll get answers to your screening questionnaire and get a lot of people into your study.
Okay. So I would like to start sampling experiences for my current clients. So do you have like an example of a user flow? So to avoid being invasive, or at least like best practices to do this?
I don't think we have enough time for that, but I'm happy to answer that after, okay? That's a very big question. He's running to you, and he's getting to you.
The app that you were talking about,
Yes.
that where you interrupted and gathered replies,
Yes.
is that something that's openly available for
Yes.
companies like us to use?
Yes. It was developed by a UX engineer at Google. It's freely available on both iOS or App Store and Google Play. It's called Paco, P-A-C-O, Paco. The website is pacoapp.com. Paco is the name of his dog and also stands for Personal Analytics Companion. One of the tweets I'm going to send in a few minutes is this developer's talk, TED Talk, that he introduces the app.
Tomer, so I'm Tov. How do you decide which users to survey? For example, in our case, we have a large searchable database of pets with many people coming searching for pets, but they're different types of people. So how would we decide who do we want to ask the questions of, and how do we parse out who is giving us the answers?
We're at the Lean Startup Conference. I say guess, have an estimation, have an assumption about who your users are, who your audience is, serve them, and see what happens. If they're not your audience, you'll learn about it very quickly, and then you can move on. It's very hard, sometimes it's very hard to tell who to approach, who is the right audience for that. So try, yeah.
Did you have a question? Oh.
No? More questions?
How many questions would you do maximum to ask people?
Excellent question. In an experience sampling study. I would say it doesn't matter how many questions, it matters how much time you're taking away from them. So our experience is that it shouldn't be more than a minute. So 1 minute, we actually asked them more questions in this study. I can't remember which ones, but we asked them more questions. We asked them to take a photo if that better explains what they wanted to know. And we got, I think, 25% of the answers that we got were attached with photos, and that was really helpful. So it doesn't matter how many questions, just make sure that it's not more than 1 minute. And I want to say something to the people at home or wherever they watch online. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them over Twitter at TSHARON. More?
Thanks. So you mentioned that you narrowed down the categories of questions to 8.
Yes.
And my question is experience sampling more appropriate for some of those than others? And if so, would you mind giving us some guidelines for that?
Experience sampling is only good for when you're after repeated behavior. Okay, so if you are interested in solving a problem related to boarding a plane for people who fly once a year, experience sampling is not the right study to go. I would go with interviews or observation or things like that. So experience sampling is good for answering the needs question, what do people need, but not in all situations. All right? And there are other methods to answer the same question. Okay? Did I answer your question? Yeah, okay. More questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, we have one more.
Hi, I was curious about if you're dealing with a population who is not particularly internet savvy, and do you have any suggestions about how you might better interact with that population if you're not dealing with folks who are used to the pop-ups and know what to do with those?
You're hinting that there's a product that, in place, and I don't know which product you're talking about, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you want to find people who are not online, they don't have smartphones. So go to the street. It's called street intercepts, not Starbucks interviews, street intercepts, not startup interviews in San Francisco. Go to where you assume your audience is at and do some street intercepts there. I see some people smiling. They do Starbucks interviews in San Francisco. Find them where they're at. So if you're targeting, lower socioeconomic classes, then go to these areas and intercept them on the street and ask them the questions in person. You can do an experience sampling there. You just need to go out and do it. Find them where they linger. All right, thank you very much.